There's a number that should terrify every American over 50, 23%. That's how much Social Security benefits will be automatically cut when the trust fund runs out in 2033. Not maybe, not if Congress fails to act, automatically, by law. The average Social Security check today is $1,827 per month. In 2033, it becomes $1,407. A $420 per month cut. For someone living on Social Security alone, that's catastrophic. But here's what nobody's telling you. That 23% cut is the optimistic scenario because we've seen this exact pattern before. France in 1793, the Soviet Union in 1991, Greece in 2012, Detroit in 2013. 4 times, 4 countries, government pension systems collapsed. And every time, the people who trusted the promise lost everything. The math says Social Security cannot pay what it's promised. The history says governments always break pension promises. And the timeline says we're in stage 3 of a 4-stage collapse. This is the story of how pension systems die, why governments always choose inflation over honesty, and why the pattern says your retirement isn't as safe as you think. Before we go through the 4 stages, you need to understand what a pension collapse actually looks like. Not in theory, in practice. When the checks stop coming or become worthless, a pension collapse is not a policy debate. It's a personal catastrophe. You worked 30, 40 years. You paid into the system every paycheck. The government promised you a specific amount at retirement, and then one day, the promise is broken. Not because you did anything wrong, because the math stopped working. Too many retirees, too few workers, too much debt. And when that happens, governments don't admit failure. They restructure, they redefine, they call it reform. But what it actually is confiscation. Your promised benefits are reduced, inflated away, or converted into something worthless. And the people who depend entirely on the pension, they're the ones who suffer most. Let's start with the first modern example. Revolutionary France, 1793. This is the original template for how governments destroy pensions. Before the French Revolution, the monarchy operated a pension system for clergy, military officers, and government officials. These weren't luxurious pensions. They were modest payments funded by church tithes, land rents, and taxation. The system had worked for decades. It was considered permanent, backed by the wealth of the church and the authority of the king. Then came the revolution. In 1789, the revolutionary government seized all church lands. That was 10% of France. They abolished tithes, they nationalized church property, and suddenly the pension system had no funding. The revenue sources were gone, but the obligations remained. Over 100,000 clergy, retired soldiers, and officials were owed pensions, and the new government had no money to pay them. Stage 1, the promise. The monarchy had guaranteed these pensions. People had worked their entire lives expecting them. The obligation was real. Stage 2, the crisis. The revolution eliminated the revenue, but kept the obligation. The gap became mathematically unsustainable. The government owed pensions it could not pay. Stage 3, the solution. The government issued a new paper currency called Assignats. These were supposed to be backed by the value of the confiscated church land. The government would sell the land gradually and redeem the Assignats. In theory, it was sound. In practice, it was a disaster. Because instead of selling land and redeeming Assignats, the government printed more Assignats to cover its expenses, including pensions. By 1793, Assignats were being printed in massive quantities, and their value was collapsing. Stage 4, the collapse. By 1796, Assignats were worth less than 1% of their original value. Pensions were still technically paid. The checks arrived, but they were worthless. A pension that should have bought a month of food couldn't buy a loaf of bread. Clergy and retired officials starved, fled the country, or depended on family. The government kept claiming the pensions were paid. Technically, they were, but in worthless paper. The promise was broken, not by stopping payments, but by destroying the currency. What survived? Those who converted assignats to gold or silver early, those who owned land, those who had access to foreign currency, British pounds or Dutch guilders. They preserved wealth. Everyone who trusts the government's paper promise lost everything. Now let's jump forward 198 years. Soviet Union, 1991. A different ideology, a different century, but the exact same pattern. The Soviet Union operated a state pension system covering all workers. Retirement age was 60 for men, 55 for women. Pensions were paid in rubles, guaranteed by the state for 50 years. The system worked. Every month, the checks arrived. Retirees trusted it completely. Stage 1, the promise. The Soviet government had built a massive pension system. Millions of retirees depended on it. The promise was ironclad. The state would provide. Stage 2, the crisis. By the 1980 seconds, the Soviet economy was dying. Oil revenue was falling. Military spending consumed 15 to 20% of GDP. The pension obligations kept growing as the population aged. But there were no reserves. The system was pay as you go. Current workers' taxes paid current retirees. And the ratio was collapsing. Fewer workers, more retirees, less revenue. Stage 3, the solution. The government kept paying pensions in rubles, but to cover the shortfall, they printed rubles. Lots of rubles. Inflation began to accelerate. In 1991, inflation hit 100%. In 1992, 500%. Prices were doubling every few weeks. But the pension checks kept coming, same nominal amount, just worth less every day. Stage 4, the collapse. On the 26th of December 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. The ruble collapsed. From 0.7 rubles per dollar in 1991 to 5,000 rubles per dollar by 1993. Pensions were still paid. The government mailed the checks, but they were worthless. A pension that should have covered rent and food couldn't buy a week's groceries. Retirees who had worked their entire lives in factories, in schools, in government offices, they stood in bread lines. They sold family heirlooms for food. Some starved. The pension system didn't stop. It just became meaningless. What survived? Those who had access to US dollars or German marks. Hard currency held value while the ruble died. Those who had dachas, small country homes, could grow food. Those with connections could barter in the black market. Everyone who depended solely on ruble pensions lost everything. The government kept the promise technically. The checks arrived, but the value evaporated. Now, let's look at a modern Western example. Greece, 2010 to 2015. This is the most relevant to the United States because Greece was a developed democracy with a currency backed by the European Union. It seems stable, permanent, and it collapsed anyway. Stage 1, the promise. Greece had built a generous pension system. Public sector workers could retire at 58. Pensions were 80 to 90% of final salary. The system had no reserves. It was funded entirely by current taxation. But during the EU boom years of the 2000s, that seemed fine. Tax revenue was growing, the economy was expanding, nobody questioned the math. Stage 2, the crisis. In 2009, the global financial crisis hit. Greece's economy contracted, tax revenue fell, but the pension obligations remained fixed. By 2010, Greece was spending 25 billion euros per year on pensions. That was 11% of GDP. The government was borrowing just to make pension payments. And when the debt crisis hit, creditors cut Greece off. The European Union and IMF offered a bailout, but only with conditions. Massive spending cuts, including pensions. Stage 3, the solution. The Greek government announced pension cuts. First 10%, then 20%, then more. Retirement age was raised from 58 to 67. Benefits were slashed across the board. The government insisted the cuts were temporary, necessary to save the system. Protesters filled the streets. Riots erupted. But the cuts kept coming. Stage 4, the collapse. By 2015, total pension cuts reached 40 to 45% for many retirees. The average pension fell from 1,350 euros per month to 833 euros. For elderly Greeks who had no other income, this was devastating. They couldn't afford rent, food, medicine. The suicide rate among the elderly increased 35% between 2010 and 2015. The government called it pension reform. What it was a broken promise. The system was saved on paper. The retirees were destroyed. What survived? Those who had pensions from other EU countries. Those who owned property outside Greece. Those who had moved euros into foreign banks before capital controls were imposed. Everyone who depended solely on Greek state pensions lost 40% and never got it back. One more example. Detroit, 2013. This is American, recent. And it proves the pattern can happen here. Detroit was once the richest city in America, Motor City, the heart of the auto industry. And it had a pension system for city workers, police, firefighters, sanitation workers, clerks. The city promised them pensions for life. Stage 1, the promise. Detroit's pension system was funded by property taxes and city revenue. For decades, it worked. Workers paid in, retirees got paid. The promise seemed secure. Stage 2, the crisis. Detroit's population collapsed from 1.8 million in 1950 to 700,000 by 2013. The tax base evaporated. Auto plants closed. Property values fell. City revenue dropped 40%, but the pension obligations remained. By 2013, Detroit's pension funds had a shortfall of $5 billion. The city was bankrupt. Stage 3, the solution. In July 2013, Detroit filed for Chapter 9 bankruptcy. A federal judge ruled that pensions could be cut. This was unprecedented. Most people believed pensions were protected, legally untouchable, but the judge classified pension funds as unsecured creditors, just like bondholders, subject to cuts in bankruptcy. Stage 4, the collapse. In 2014, the bankruptcy plan was approved. General retirees saw pension cuts of 4.5%. Police and fire retirees saw cuts of 20 to 30%. Cost of living adjustments were eliminated permanently. A Detroit firefighter who retired in 2013, expecting $3,400 per month, got $2,380, a 30% cut for the rest of his life. The city called it shared sacrifice. What it was a broken promise. What survived? Those who had 401k plans outside the pension system. Those who had Social Security as backup income. Those who had saved independently. Everyone who depended solely on the Detroit pension lost 20 to 30% forever. 4 countries. 4 pension collapses. 4 identical patterns. Let me show you the sequence, because once you see it, you'll understand why Social Security is following the same path. Governments create pension systems. They promise generous benefits, guaranteed for life, protected by law, safe. The promise is politically popular. Workers love it. Retirees depend on it. And for years, or even decades, it works. Revenue declines. The economy shrinks. The tax base erodes. Demographics shift. But the obligations remain fixed. The gap between what's promised and what can be paid becomes mathematically unsustainable. The government faces a choice: default openly, cut benefits, or inflate the currency. Openly defaulting is political suicide. So they delay. Stage 3, the solution. The government announces reforms. Benefit cuts, retirement age increases, means testing. They insist the changes are necessary, temporary, designed to save the system. Protests happen. People are angry. But the government proceeds because the alternative is worse. This stage can last years. The crisis is acknowledged, Solutions are debated, but the core problem remains. Stage 4, the collapse. Benefits are either paid in worthless currency or cut directly. In France, assignats became worthless. In the Soviet Union, rubles collapsed. In Greece and Detroit, benefits were slashed. The people who depended entirely on the pension are destroyed. The government declares the system saved, but the promise is broken permanently. Now let's talk about the United States in 2025 and why we're in stage 3 of this exact pattern. Stage 1, the promise. Social Security was created in 1935. Originally, workers retired at 65 and received benefits funded by payroll taxes. Over the decades, the promise expanded. Disability benefits added in 1956, Medicare in 1965, cost of living adjustments in 1975. A trust fund was created to save surplus taxes for future shortfalls. Politicians from both parties promised the system was sound. Your money is safe, guaranteed by law, protected forever. Stage 2, the crisis. The baby boomer generation is retiring, 10,000 per day. The worker to retiree ratio is collapsing. In 2000, there were 3.4 workers for every retiree. By 2025, it's 2.3 to 1. By 2035, it will be 2 to 1. Fewer workers supporting more retirees. And people are living longer. When Social Security started, life expectancy was 61. Retirement age was 65. Most people died before collecting. Today, life expectancy is 79. People collect for 15, 20 years. The obligations have exploded. The Social Security Trust Fund is depleting. Official government projection: the trust fund runs out in 2033, 8 years from now. When that happens, incoming payroll taxes will only cover 77% of promised benefits. By law, benefits must be cut 23% automatically. This isn't speculation. This is the Congressional Budget Office. The math is public. And it's not just Social Security. State pensions are worse. Illinois, New Jersey, California, all massively underfunded. Total state pension shortfall, $1.3 trillion, according to Pew Research. That's money promised to teachers, police, firefighters, state workers. And it doesn't exist. Stage 3, the solution. We're here right now. The crisis is acknowledged. Everyone knows the trust fund is depleting. Congress debates solutions. Raise the retirement age. Cut benefits for higher earners. Increase payroll taxes. But nothing happens because every solution is politically toxic. Raising the retirement age angers workers. Cutting benefits angers retirees. Raising taxes angers everyone. So Congress delays. They kick the problem to the next election. And the clock keeps ticking. Meanwhile, state pensions are already cutting. Illinois reduced benefits. New Jersey froze cost of living adjustments. California is restructuring pensions for new employees. The pattern is starting. Just like Greece in 2010, small cuts first, then larger ones, then the collapse. Stage 4, the collapse. This is coming. History says it's inevitable. The only question is the form. Will it be inflation like France and the Soviet Union, benefits paid but worthless because the dollar collapses, or direct cuts like Greece and Detroit, benefits slashed 30, 40% by law, or a combination, partial cuts plus inflation, a stealth confiscation where your check arrives but buys half as much. The math says the current promises cannot be kept. Social Security has $22 trillion in unfunded obligations. That's money promised but not funded. Medicare adds another $50 trillion. These are not conservative estimates. These are official government numbers. And there is no plan to pay them. None. Congress could act. They could raise taxes dramatically. They could cut benefits now. They could means test the system. But they won't, because it's political suicide. So they'll wait, and when the trust fund runs out in 2033, they'll call it a crisis and implement emergency measures. Just like Greece did, just like Detroit did, and the people who depend entirely on Social Security will lose. So what survives when pension systems collapse? History gives us the answer, and it's consistent across all four cases. In France, those who held gold and silver survived. Assignats went to zero. Metals held value. Those who owned land outside France preserved wealth. Those who had access to foreign currency, British pounds, Dutch guilders, they escaped the collapse. What failed? Government bonds, assignats, pension promises, anything denominated in the collapsing currency. In the Soviet Union, those who had US dollars or German marks survived. Hard currency held value while the ruble died. Those who owned dachas could grow food. Those with skills to barter, mechanics, carpenters, they traded services for goods. What failed? Ruble savings, state pensions, government promises. In Greece, those with property outside Greece maintained wealth. Those who moved euros into foreign banks before capital controls were protected. Those with pensions from other EU countries had backup income. What failed? Greek government bonds, Greek bank deposits, Greek state pensions. In Detroit, those with 401k plans outside the pension system were safe. Those with Social Security had backup income. Those who owned property outside Detroit could relocate. What failed? City pensions, municipal bonds, government promises. The pattern is clear. What survives? Hard assets, gold, land, commodities, things the government cannot print or cut by decree, foreign currency or assets outside the collapsing system, jurisdiction diversity, income from multiple sources, multiple countries, productive skills, the ability to create value when paper promises fail, early action, those who recognized stage 2 and moved assets before stage 4. What fails? Government promises, pensions, bonds, currency, anything dependent on the government keeping its word, domestic paper assets, savings denominated in the collapsing system, single source dependency, relying entirely on one pension, one government, one promise, late action, waiting until stage 4 to protect yourself. Now apply this to the United States. In 2025, 67 million Americans receive Social Security. For 40% of retirees, it's their only income. They have no 401k, no pension, no savings. When Social Security cuts benefits 23% in 2033, or inflates the dollar to worthlessness, or restructures payments into government bonds worth pennies, those people are destroyed. This is not financial advice. This is historical analysis. France, the Soviet Union, Greece, Detroit. 4 times, 4 countries, 4 pension collapses. The pattern was identical. Stage 1, generous promises. Stage 2, unsustainable math. Stage 3, denial and delay. Stage 4, collapse. The United States is in stage 3. The crisis is acknowledged. Solutions are debated, but nothing is done. And history says stage 4 is coming. The trust fund depletes in 2033. That's 8 years. But if you study the pattern, the collapse doesn't wait for the official date. In France, the assignat collapsed before the land was fully sold. In the Soviet Union, the ruble died before the USSR officially dissolved. In Greece, the cuts came faster than promised. In Detroit, bankruptcy happened suddenly. Stage 4 accelerates. It doesn't wait. So the question isn't whether Social Security will fail. The math says it will. The question is what you do about it. History shows that those who recognize the pattern early, who diversify income, who hold assets the government cannot inflate or cut, who prepare for stage 4 while everyone else is still in denial, those are the people who survive. The government made you a promise. You paid in your entire working life. And they told you Social Security is safe. But that's what they told French clergy in 1789. Soviet workers in 1985. Greek retirees in 2009. Detroit firefighters in 2012. Every time the promise was broken. Every time the people who trusted most lost everything. And every time the government called it reform, stabilization, necessary sacrifice. 67 million Americans are depending on a promise that history says will be broken. The math says it's already gone. The only question is when you'll find out. If this opened your eyes to where we are in the cycle, subscribe. Because when the trust fund runs out, when the cuts come, when the checks arrive but can't buy groceries, you'll want to understand what happened and why. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in the past. And history has already shown us exactly how this ends.